It being 6:30, I'll call the meeting of the Oregon School District Board of Education to order on Monday, June 11th, 2018. We're at the Oregon School District High School Innovation Center. Ms. Wick, would you call the roll?
Ms. Feeney. Present. Ms. Oderico. Here. Ms. Flanagan. Here. Mr. Pancraft.
Here.
Mr. Kraus.
Yo.
Mr. LeBrun.
Here.
Mr. Zak.
Present. Board has a quorum. I have proof that the meeting has been appropriately noticed under Wisconsin's open meetings law, and that will be with Ms. Wick if anyone wants to inspect that. The agenda this evening has a number of action items, proposed increases in open enrollment spaces, 2017-2018 budget adjustments, discussion regarding the November referendum. In discussion items, we're going to have a presentation on our equity initiative and a discussion by the board in terms of what it sees its role going to be, a graduation report, superintendent's report, and the board will go into closed session at the end of the night's meeting to talk about land acquisition and collective bargaining. We'll do it in that order because, Troy, you're going to be absenting yourself from the latter one, yes, per our protocol with that. So I need a motion to approve the agenda as posted.
Move to approve the agenda.
Dan with the motion, is there a second? Tim with the second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye, opposed. So we have an agenda. Agenda item A, consent calendar. Is there any item on the consent calendar that any board member wishes to remove? Seeing none, I'd make a motion to approve the consent calendar items. Ms. Flanagan with the motion. Is there a second? Bart Feeney with a second. I'll note we have 4 donations this evening. One is from American Transmission Company in the amount of $375 for the Netherwood Knoll Arboretum. The Oregon Educational Foundation, $500 for Heritage Day guest speakers. Baseball Alumni Association, and that was a group of 40 alumni baseball players from Oregon High School donated $15,000 effort spearheaded by the president of Badger Sports and a former Oregon baseball player, Paul Speth. It's a very generous donation. If you've been down in JC East and seen the scoreboard up there, it's pretty impressive, and that was thanks to the Alumni Association for spearheading the fundraising for that. And then Oregon Rotary Club, $153 for the Prairie View Bike Rotary. We appreciate all those donations. It makes us a better district for them. Ms. Wick, would you call the roll? Because we have a retirement.
Ms. Flanagan.
Yes.
Ms. Feeney.
Yes.
Ms. Oderico.
Yes.
Mr. Pancraft.
Yes.
Mr. Kraus.
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun.
Yes.
Mr. Zak.
Yes, consent item, agenda items are approved by unanimous vote. Moving to B, communication from the public. You can tell we're in the summer, folks. The crowds are dwindling. Not that we have many, but board policy 18004 nonetheless provides an opportunity for the community members to appear. Is there any member registered with you, Janie?
No.
I don't see anybody here. Does anybody want to talk? Any administrators? No? Okay, we're going to dispense with the 3 times calling, given the crowd. OEA report, I didn't see anybody regarding that. So that takes us to item D, action items, potential increases in open enrollment spaces. And Gina, is that yours or Brian's?
Absolutely.
Okay, then we'll have Brian start and he'll pass it off as he wishes.
We have a report in front of you, board members, and in just a second, I will be there. Okay, here I made it. You'll recall state statute changes a couple of years ago gives public school districts the opportunity to go to their boards and make any modifications that they see fit based on enrollment after the initial seating arrangements are made. We've been doing our studying, and Katie Heitz, our registrar, has looked over our applications so far, our maximum capacity, our current enrollments, and the number of spaces available. We have a recommendation that addresses 4K enrollment, and you'll notice 4K enrollment right now is a little bit down, and we have some additional spaces that we're requesting, and that's for 12 spaces. This would fit within our open enrollment capacity. We've actually added a section at one of our sites this year, so we feel comfortable with making that recommendation. Then furthermore, we looked at kindergarten, and you'll notice the maximum capacity for the last few years, we've been in that 280 to 300, and Steve and I were having a conversation yesterday at graduation. We both remember a time when our kindergarten enrollments were in the 240 seemed high, and there were years when it was 210. So we've seen that move up. You might recall 3 years ago, perhaps 4 years ago, we were a bit surprised with a real bump in kindergarten enrollment, and we were over 300 and a bit stressed at the kindergarten level, but we allocated in October of that particular year for some additional paraprofessional time. You can look at the data in Table 4. That's the individual enrollments at the 3 schools. Brooklyn's at a dead even 20, and remember our limit is 22. Netherwood, we've reached 22, and they now have 5 sections, and we have some capacity at Prairie View as well at the 19s and the 20s. So our request is to add 12 spaces for 4K and 10 spaces for kindergarten, and I will yield to Gina and Andy and Leslie if there's something that I missed during the course of our review and consultation over the last couple of weeks. Board members, there you have it. What questions can we respond to?
Barb?
We are adding it for this upcoming year, 18-19. Yes, one of our sites wanted to add an additional section, so that's why we have more room.
So try to keep this right now that additional section.
I don't know if it'll exactly work that way because some students who apply for open enrollment may not attend. So that is where she would have them right now in terms of current numbers, but it may just not end up being that way if there's space at the site that parents prefer. We have parents do a preference, and we try to honor that as much as we have space.
Any more questions, Barb? Tim?
And again, even when it comes to 4K, once they start in 4K, we reserve that spot for the future, for the ongoing future.
Yes, we do.
Okay.
But even though let's assume we don't approve the 4K, they still have the right if they're residents. Oh, that's open enroll. They could, if we deny them for 4K, what about kindergarten then?
Then they reapply. If
Okay.
they're denied for 4K, they have to reapply. But once they're in our numbers, they stay in our numbers. So
Okay.
we would assume they were here for kindergarten.
Okay. Any more questions, Tim?
We do have some siblings in 4K and kindergarten, and that's always that delicate balance to strike so that we don't accept too many students, but we also serve families in the best way possible and not overburden our class sizes. We do feel we have a little flexibility. We were very conservative when we brought this to the board. I believe it was February, if I'm remembering correctly. So now that Katie has a bit more information, this isn't a super risky stock investment we're making. This is more of a conservative, take a look at where we are, what can reasonably fit within our sections, because having consistent sections allows for a better distribution of kids and also stability from a class size workforce standpoint.
So with the 4K, 10 additional open spaces, if we do that, then my count is we would have 2, 4, 3, 7, 8 spaces before we would hit our max, right? Open?
That's correct.
Okay.
Because we have 4 on the wait list right now.
Okay.
Courtney, any questions? Troy?
Just to clarify again, on at the kindergarten level, so looking at table 4, we'd have 18 additional spaces to get up to our 22 max per class. And the proposal is to approve 10 additional open enrollment spaces, which would leave 8 and the 8 would just be for growth over the summer of district residents.
Yes, and Katie's been looking at, she trends that data out over the last several years, and this particular, in the 18-19, I already think of this as being next school year, even though we just graduated everyone yesterday, so I don't mean to confuse you with that. We think that's a reasonable amount given our trend. And I think I share those updates with you every week if I'm remembering correctly.
Yep, thank you.
All set?
Dan, anything?
No questions, I'm excited about new growth in the district, and I just want to make sure that the administration is confident that we do have enough. I'll note that one of my employees is moving herself and her 2 kids into our school district this coming year, but she's just told me that they're enrolled in March. They didn't move until June 1st, but they're already enrolled, so they're okay.
When we did any more, Dan? I'm sorry. Yeah. When we did our capacity numbers for looking at growth in the district and, the referendum, the space stuff, that was using the 280 for kindergarten? Were we forecasting out at 22 per section for that, do you know? The reason I ask is the elephant in the room on open enrollment is the question that we get, okay, if we're got to build because we're growing, why are we open enrolling, right? And there are 2 responses to that. One is that open enrolling just fills in what our projection already is for growth, and I'm assuming that's the case, but that's the question I asked. The second point is that even these numbers aren't going to play into the growth that we're expected and the need for a new school. I mean, these are small numbers, and we're going to have to build whether or not we open enroll or not. So, but my question goes to that first point is, are we assuming levels that aren't at capacity right now as a starting point for the growth projections? Does anybody know?
The kindergarten amount's we've been at 286. That's with our current, are we at 13? I think we're at 13 sections. We've tried to hold that, and actually we went up to 14 a few years ago when we were over 300. I think you're right on, Steve, in terms of your assessment. We are not building schools for open enrollment students. We're building schools for resident kids. And while no students are, this is a dangerous term, it's an economic term, these are additional seats that we have. And when Mark Roffers put together the data, Leslie might be able to answer this a little better than I can. Mark did take into account current kids in our school district as well. But the growth that we're going to see at, I'll use Prairie View as RCI as an example. By the year 2021, we will have 150 kids, plus minus more. 150 kids turns into over 6 classrooms. Those aren't open enrolled students. Those are resident students. The other thing just to keep in mind, our class size guidelines, not requirements, guidelines, are lower at the K-3 level. So once we hit fourth grade, we have some increased capacity. If you remember the work that Bray Architects did for us with 5 or 6 different capacity studies, we go up to 25 students at K4. And additionally, as we get higher, while we're at higher grade levels, while we're always concerned about class size and we try to make all of our special education students as inclusive as possible, there are times when special education students are not in the regular ed classroom, which creates a little additional capacity for us as well.
I just looked at, Jeannie had the summary long-range facilities study, but I didn't, it just had the gross number for capacity for each building and not how that was calculated per classroom. So I don't know. No, that's Fitchburg enrollment size. So that's one thing. It's not determinative of how I'm going to vote on this, because we're going to have to build regardless of whether we add these folks or not with it. But I think it would be helpful for us to find out in terms of answering the question, if we get why'd you open enroll, whether or not the capacity numbers that we're working with for open enrollment were assumed for purposes of then calculating future growth because of new residents. So if you could find that. Okay, any other questions?
We will
from
check
any-
with Mark.
Dan?
Just if somebody could answer whether we're taking into account for this coming year the 61 apartments that are opening at Jefferson Crossing. I note that all of their 2 bedrooms seem to be all full, and they're opening on July 1st, and that's 61 units with 1 and 2 bedroom apartments and some studios. Are we calculating that?
That was in the model for the reference.
Okay, thanks.
Seeing no further questions, I need a motion, if there is one.
I'll move approval of the recommendation by the administration.
Is there a second?
Second.
Dan with a second. Is there any further discussion or questions? Seeing none, Ms. Wick, would you call the roll on this? Yes. Motion carries 7-0 to open up those open enrollment spots as requested by administration. Takes us to item D2, 2017-2018 budget adjustments. This is an annual exercise by Andy and the accounting department to true up the budget once the budget year is ended. So Andy, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Steve. So basically, as Steve said, DPI actually does they're compelled by state law to do a state aid estimate for July 1st. So they asked by June 15th that we kind of look at our revenues and expenses and just see if there's anything that wasn't anticipated in our budget, update it, and then submit it to them so that they can make as accurate as an estimate as possible. So what we've done is we've kind of reviewed through the accounts, looked for places that we might be a little bit higher than we were anticipating, a little bit lower than we were anticipating, kind of moved everything around to basically keep the same differential in the budget that was there when we originally approved it, but moving the funds to where they kind of were spent and where we brought in additional funds. So there's a bunch of things that are on here that we kind of laid out for you that are examples of how we do that. It's not all inclusive, but we kind of tried to hit the high points for you. So with that being said, if anyone has any questions, or what questions can I answer?
Dan, anything from Andy? For Andy?
Yeah. Andy, could you comment on the building budgets and how their rollovers are progressing? Are the amounts continuing to get bigger?
I haven't looked at it specifically for this year. What I will say in general is that as principals become a little bit more brand new principals are a little bit more conservative, and as those principals kind of get into the rhythm of a budget process, they then use that those kind of carryover funds to achieve strategic objectives which they have identified within their budget. So I would say actually, we've have starting to become a little bit more senior's the wrong word, experienced principal core that I would anticipate that you're going to see some reductions in the fund balance this year for those school purposes. There may be other increases. For instance, I can mention that if you recall, we had $125,000 for playground funds. The only building that's using those playground funds, which I'm holding, is Brooklyn. So the other schools, Prairie View and Netherwood and Rome Corners, haven't yet figured out what they're going to do with those funds. So that will be another carryover item that didn't exist last year that will be there this year. So that's just an example of how kind of things move around a little bit. But I think the schools have definitely gotten the message. Proof will be in the pudding when we close out the books. But I think they understand that they're supposed to reduce those carryover funds. Long answer, sorry.
No, that's okay. Specifically, school building operations, there's a difference of about $10,000 in that line from the original budget to the revised budget. Does that have anything to do with that?
No, school. So these are very large functional areas that you're looking at here for these additions. School building operations is actually office of the principal, so that's a very small portion of their budget.
Thanks.
Yep.
Troy? No question. Courtney? No question. Barb?
One question, and that is the $50,000 in tuition for private school placements?
For private school tuition?
Yeah.
That was related to some special needs situations that kind of happened during the year.
Okay.
Krista?
Just one, in terms of the transportation increase, was that the new route based on Raven Oaks and aiding that situation?
Partially. I think we had anticipated some of that. We also had, if you've noticed, diesel costs are a little bit higher than what we started with. So that's another component of that. And then we've also had, as I mentioned before, some special needs students. We've had some additional expenses related to that. And actually those private tuition situations have created that situation as well.
And then I was just curious about the co-curricular activity and what is all included in that. That was a revised budget. That was quite a jump.
Well, let me try to look at that, because off the top of my head, yeah, that is a larger increase, and I'm trying to remember what that could have been. I might need to get back to you on that.
Okay.
I do have notes, I just need to find them.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, I'd need a motion to approve the revisions and adjustments to the 2017-2018 budget.
I move to approve the revisions as presented.
Second? Mr. LeBrun with the second. Any further questions or further discussion? Seeing none, Janie, would you call the roll?
Mr. Crowe?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Ms. Feedy? Yes. Ms. Flanagan? Yes. Ms. Oderico? Yes. Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
And Mr. Crowe?
Yes, we have an adjusted budget by 7-0 vote.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to D3, referendum plan. Brian and I talked last week about where we were with respect to generating numbers, and we have a general sense that maybe a little bit more time would be wise just to make sure we have accurate numbers as opposed to rushing through stuff, and we've got time. So we've got a couple options in terms of how to proceed, but I'll let Brian have the floor and talk through that.
The report that you have in front of you, I'll give you the quick summary and then open it up for questions. The question number 1, that's what we would identify as the school construction question. Our last time, that was the question for all of the capital costs to get to 54.6 million. Again, question one identifies all of the capital related costs, and we're working with Findorf on that. If you click down to the tentative calendar, I should have started with that. In conversations that Steve and I had, we were thinking tonight would be board approval of referendum language without costs, so we can really pin down those resolutions that we need. And then on June 22nd, which is next Wednesday, we'd have near final construction estimate costs from Findorf. We have a meeting scheduled with Findorf, and we think we're really close. We had a good meeting with them this past week, and they assured us that they will have final construction costs on the 22nd. Then perhaps the more challenging cost estimate is one that Andy's working on, and that's on the operational costs, which would be question number 2. And you might recall, I'll try to dust your memory off, and my memory as well. Back in 2000, when RCI was built, the district approved a recurring referendum for maintenance. And that recurring referendum, Andy will know the exact number. I'll say it's about $320-some thousand. $300,000. And that went for a 10-year period, so it was a non-recurring maintenance-only referendum. Then in 2008, we were looking at another maintenance referendum that would go for an additional 10 years once the first one was over in 2010. So we went to the voters at presidential election, and it was approved. That time we raised it from $300,000 to $400,000. Again, sort of a cost of living adjustment with construction costs. So we have the last year on the 10-year maintenance referendum at $400,000, which is in the property tax bill right now, in our budget right now, is 2020. Andy was doing some research. We cannot, prior to the state law change, we would have likely asked for 3 questions: a capital question, an operational question for the new school, and then a third question on the maintenance referendum. Well, as Andy was digging through the details of state law, we learned that we can only ask for 2 questions instead of 3. So a decision point for the board is, should we include that maintenance referendum in the recurring referendum, question number 2, and then the question is at what amount. For right now, for planning purposes, we've just left it at $400,000. Then on June 29th, we will also get from PMA. All of you are familiar with Michelle, the name Michelle Weiberg. You've seen her a bunch of times. She is our bond person that actually prepares our financial estimates. She's working with Andy on some tax impact statements and attempting to, as crystal ballish as we can, come up with appropriate tax values as our community continues to grow. Because remember, as we continue to grow, there are more property tax payers to pay for the costs of the school district. If we can identify the proper ratio, we can grow at a rate where it is less burdensome on taxpayers. That is a really complicated thing to do, but Andy and Michelle are working on that. Then Steve and I had a conversation about the July 9th board meeting, and that could be a board approval of the final referendum language contained in question 1 and contained in question 2. That's really the board's action to call the referendum and to put it in place for November 6, 2018. If you skip down to the last entry in the tentative calendar, that's the final statutory date. That's August 27th, and that would be the final date that the board could approve a referendum. You might say, well, why don't we just wait till then? Well, there's a huge advantage to us on the communication side if we have our ducks in a row early for us to have the board approve it, and then we can start the messaging process with the referendum. now I'm going to skip back up to question 1, just give you a slight amount of detail. Obviously, question 1 would include, it would include the, it's all identified around something called a public purpose. Actually, I said up, I actually went down. I'm on the working draft official referendum ballot. Andy's been working with Brian Lancer from Quarles and Brady. This is a sample ballot. You've likely seen these, you voted on these ballots before, similar to what we used in 2014. And in conversations with Steve, we decided we're just going to leave that blank right now because we're not exactly sure what the number is, and then we'll fill in the various public purposes. Obviously, the first public purpose is the construction of building and improvement, and then furnishing and equipping a new elementary school, acquisition for sites for the new school and future district facilities. We've talked about buying more than one site, buying 2 sites so that we can, we would be set in that phase 2, the 2024 or the 2022 referendum as well. Well, we also included, again, this is sort of the kitchen sink referendum question. We included security improvements to district facilities. Andy's been looking at some minor security improvements. Remember, that was a main feature in our 2014 referendum. We also included renovation and remodeling of classrooms, outdoor education classrooms, and energy efficiency improvements. When we were doing our focus groups, there were parents and community members that asked us about the outdoor education classrooms, and that being part of our green initiative, when we would be including those at Brooklyn and at RCI. If the board so desired, now would be a time to do that. We've asked Findorf to give us a tentative budget for an outdoor education classroom, and we'll have that on the 22nd. In terms of energy efficiency improvements, the gentleman sitting to my left is always looking at ways to save what I'll call infrastructure costs or utility costs. And Andy's been working with Bray and Findorf to look at possibly adding some solar panels to, we have them at Brooklyn, to add them to Netherwood, Prairie View, and RCI. Again, we really can't do that out of the current budget. We would need to have some capital funds for that. So we tried to make question number 1 as broad as possible. We have time tonight we have time after tonight to make additions and remodeling to this question. Then question number 2, if you slide down to the next page, that's the recurring question, and you'll notice there's really 2 portions to that recurring question. It says paying operational and maintenance expenses of the district, including capital maintenance projects at district facilities. That's basically the language for our current $400,000 maintenance referendum. The one thing this proposal would change is it would no longer be a 10-year limit. It would be permanent. So that's one significant change. And then secondarily, the estimate that Andy is working on is the cost of operating a new school, a new elementary school. The materials that I've sent to you over the last couple of weeks, you know, the real pivot point on operating a new elementary school, Andy has to come up with an estimate that identifies what ratio of our future budget inflows, our future budget growth that we have, can he use to pay for the additional costs, and what are we going to need as a recurring expense. And of course, it's always a little challenging to come up with that estimate. If we're too conservative and we don't ask for enough in the referendum process, it will put pressure on the district budget in the years ahead. So I will yield to Andy making any additions or corrections to anything that I've shared. Otherwise, we're happy to respond to questions board members might have.
Question. So if, for instance, the first referendum were not to pass and the second one were not to pass, that 10-year, $400,000 maintenance would stop in 2020.
Yeah, the 2020, 2021 year. So 2019, 2020 is the last year of it. So we have 18, 19, and then 19, 20.
Okay.
So we have a little bit of time there.
Okay.
It was just that we were trying to do it like we did in 2008 at a larger gubernatorial or presidential election.
Sure. Okay.
And we're going to be meeting in closed session later this evening to talk about the progress of our discussions regarding acquisition of land. So that'll inform us a little more. There have been some developments in that area, so we'll have a clearer picture. Brian, when I thought maybe we could approve the language tonight, one thing that I wasn't thinking of is that there would be potential other items on here other than just the elementary school that we'd need to consider, and we need to see those dollars first, before we do that, right? I'm thinking, that's my thought, but I'm seeing a lot of signatures that I don't know that we're going to be comfortable running out of approval of language with all those items without seeing because we might be in a position to say, no, we're not going to do that item or this item, just depending on the dollars. So the reason I had thought about doing the questions was just to provide a little further foundation and commitment from the board standpoint that we're going ahead when we pass the language, but not having a dollar number in there. But I think you guys already have that from us. I mean, one of the things we'd like to do is have Bray start working at some point on design aspects of this to hit the construction, if it gets improved in November. But is anybody comfortable going ahead with the questions tonight, or do you guys share my reservations in terms of doing the language? I think with number 2, we've got to contemplate what that dollar number is and whether we want to put the capital maintenance in there. And I think for me, I'd rather wait to see what the number is with that. Dan, what's your thought?
Yeah, I agree with you, Steve. It's good that we've got a look now at this, but I don't think it's necessary for us to approve this particular language. There was a question I had about the language in question number 2, and I do believe that every time we build a building, we have a question number 2 about the maintenance, etc. So I imagine that we're running off of several of these particular things in order to exceed the revenue limits, and I don't know, I'm guessing maybe 5 of these that we're exceeding the revenue limits for each school, maybe not. But
I can think of 3.
okay, 3 currently, not this one included?
Right.
Okay, so this one would be an additional revenue limit increase, and the language doesn't indicate that this would be additional to anything that we're already doing. So, though I haven't drafted these myself before, it might be clearer to somebody who would wanted to read this and understand it to add the words "an additional" right before the dollar amount. And maybe that wouldn't make it clearer, but it helps me understand the fact that this is not the only revenue excess that the district has going.
I just kind of point out, once an ongoing override is in place, it just becomes part of our base. So it's not tracked separately. It's just, I can remember 3 since I've been here that we've done. So I don't know what bond counsel would say about that, but I'm sure they'd have an opinion.
So as a follow-up to that, then, when we do one and it passes, that becomes part of the revenue limit.
Correct.
That is referred to in section 121.91 of the Wisconsin statutes. Is that all part of our 121.91, or is 121.91 a specific number for our district, and then each one of them adds on to the 121.91.
I believe the statutes is probably related to the revenue limit statute, and that becomes part of our base from which we build on. So we don't break those out at all. There were some interesting legislative proposals this last year to try to limit those that school districts have done that would be retroactive, and my understanding is that that died fairly quickly because it would be very difficult to implement that. But so that's a little confusing there, but the way DPI monitors that number is once an ongoing referendum override is passed, your number just becomes, it's just built into the next number. So
It's baked in.
yeah.
Thanks.
Any other questions, Courtney?
Not so much a question as a request, which is that after Michelle has an opportunity to really look at this in June, I think it would be a really great idea to have a special board meeting for her to meet with the board and explain what she's discovered and how she's arrived at her conclusions, because that's a really complicated process and it can be really difficult to understand. And I know that I've in the past have benefited from those meetings, so that's just a suggestion I'm making.
Thanks. And Brian and I will talk about that as they move through kind of the process of getting those conclusions and making sure that we have time to digest that stuff. I mean, I remember last time we did an hour, just a special meeting with Michelle coming in. I think it was in the morning where all of us were available to just sit down and hammer that out just in and of itself. You know, because it may be how we do that in terms of backload the amortization of the security just to kind of track growth instead of front-ending it.
Yeah, we can talk to her.
You know, because, you know, if really we want to be able to say to taxpayers that a large portion of the costs of the new buildings will be borne by new tax base generated by the growth, that's not all going to happen in year one. And so to the extent that we can delay our principal and interest costs to reflect when the actual increase in the tax base will occur, that I don't know if that's feasible or whether that drives up the cost of the bond so that it doesn't generate the type of savings or that we want.
Yeah, I mean, the longer you borrow money before you start paying on it, it has an impact on the total cost of the bonds. There was a model that we looked at that potentially could have shifted that a little bit. The concern was that we're going to be going to referendum again in the not too distant future, and so we didn't want to have it. We wanted to have the burden kind of equally distributed rather than backloaded, I guess. But that is clearly a discussion that we can have.
Yeah, if you could kind of explore that and whatever you find out, you know, because it has, when I've talked to people, it has some cachet with them that they recognize that, hey, if we're going to defer a little bit of the principal and interest costs to a point in time when we're really realizing the increase in the tax base by the new growth, they go, okay, I get that. But if doing our phase one and phase two complicates that or nullifies that sort of rationale, we'd like to know that.
I think the biggest issue is just not knowing when it's going to happen, because when you structure the bonds, you've basically made it at least a 10-year commitment. You can't change it once you sell the bonds. So you can change it after the 10 years, but that first 10 years, and especially the interest rate market that we're in, it's starting to increase, but historically it's very, very low right now.
Yeah, and I might be able to get in on that right away rather than backload it where they're going to build into projections of a higher rate. Okay. Any other questions with the stand?
Steve, regarding what you had said earlier, to get a little more details on the dollar amounts that we're looking at in each of these projects and deciding whether we want to do each project or maybe try to scale down a project or not. it would be good for me if I could see some projected actual tax numbers, how much per $100,000 worth of home value that a person in the district would be looking at.
Right, that's the point of having a meeting with Michelle. It really helps clarify that.
Including how that might change over time as we gain more residents of the district. So not just necessarily year one and project that out, but if we could project in growth in the district and hopefully growth in the tax base, then that should hopefully go down.
Yep, and that's all information that we've got to sift and winnow, and that we're going to get. So that's typically what we get. Questions over on this side, anything like that? Okay, is everybody comfortable with the timeline? You know, that shooting for the July 9th meeting with that work taking place for the rest of June, and then with the possibility of having a special meeting before July 9th just for informational meeting purposes, maybe for an hour to do a deep dive into that. Okay, I think it'd be at that time we would look at those numbers and explore some of the additional things that, you know, are in question, number one, that we really haven't talked about as a board. You know, we need to talk about that stuff. So, you know, for people who are listening, the fact that question number one has those other things in there as a draft, that's not anything that the board has approved at this point in time, but it's stuff that we're going to consider as we move forward. You know, the other thing that I think is important for the public to understand is that we haven't approved the purchase of any land at any location at this point in time. You know, we've got a number of options and we're pursuing those. So we are committed to going in November, and we are committed to doing a K-6 building. But other than that, we haven't finalized anything. So anything else on this topic? Okay, seeing none. That takes us to committee reports. Anything from policy, Krista?
Yeah, I just did want to mention that our next policy committee meeting is July 16th at 5:30. And I want to make the board aware of that because we will be discussing policy 436, specifically the trial period of the random drug dog searches. And so we've asked, I've met with Gina and Brian, and we've asked them to come with quite a bit of information that will help us make a decision because we wanted to look at some measurables. So they'll be coming with data from the last 2 years of random drug dog searches here in our district, looking at other Dane County districts and what they do. Also looking at the Dane County Youth Assessment data that came forward, and then qualitative data from Candace and Jim and Shannon in terms of their perspective of the random drug dog searches at their schools. And so, as you know, if policy committee will make a recommendation that will come to the full board, but I think it behooves everybody of the board to be at that meeting to get that information firsthand. So that'll help our discussion when we have a full board meeting after that. So again, that's July 16th at 5:30.
Thank you. That's an off night. Yep. Anything from Visioning, Courtney? We got, I know on Wednesday, oh, sorry, Krista.
One thing for visioning is the Youth Sports and Athletic Task Force. The paper is almost written, and so I'll be getting with Courtney because that committee's task force recommendations will go to visioning. So we see that probably coming to you at the end of July. So we can talk about, yeah.
Right, and I know this Wednesday we have the Rickleball leadership thing, so that's part of the overall visioning, which our second phase of building leadership teams reporting out their work on the Rickleball levers work. That's been the culmination of our year of meetings. So that's this Wednesday night. Okay. What time? 5:30? Thanks, Jeannie. Okay, that takes us to E2, equity update and discussion. And Leslie, that's you, right? And Candace. And Shannon. Hi, guys. So whenever you're ready, go ahead.
All right, good evening. We're just going to give you the update that we were planning on at our workshop last month, but we had so many good discussions we didn't quite get to it. So now, thankfully, I get to be joined by my colleagues, Candace Weidenstein and Shannon Anderson, who've been instrumental in leading the work forward at the district level. So one of the first things that we'll talk about is the fact that we do indeed have a definition of what equity means to us in the district. And this was a definition adopted from the National Equity Project. And I know that you're already familiar, at least with the name of that organization, as they've been our partners for a couple of years now. One of the things that we did do is during our Critical Consciousness Cohort 1 weekend, and Shannon will talk about that a little bit more later, it's part of our pathway work, we did a slight modification where we moved that top statement that begins with educational equity means. We changed the pronouns to they and their as opposed to he and she, to be continually thinking about how to be more inclusive. And then,
so as we think about our work with equity, we have to ask ourselves why we're doing the work. And as a district, we need to look at why we're doing the work as well. So for us, we looked at this as a three-pronged or three-legged stool, and we're looking at data, personal stories, and allies. So we just grabbed a snapshot of some data from last spring, and as you can see from this data, it looks like our populations experience our educational opportunities a little bit differently depending on who they are and what they look like. And that is true also for our economically disadvantaged students and our students with disabilities. So again, we need to look at our data, and this is just one snapshot. We can see that this data goes through back to our forward exams. Our students experience our educational system differently across the board.
so in addition, please. Mm-hmm. And just as a reminder to people, the ACT data you're looking at right now was the junior class last year, so it's the seniors that you just saw graduate this weekend. Now, in addition to data that tells us that we have some opportunity gaps that we really want to address, in addition to that, we really look at the idea of the personal stories people share with us and the personal experiences that we're creating for not just our students, although that's our priority, but also our families. So a really excellent example of how we are continuing to work toward creating a warm, welcoming, inclusive environment are the English language classes that have been offered over the course of this last year at the district office. So it's Amy Miller and Carmen Storley and Rebecca Krenz who are together creating this class for families who are Spanish speakers and want to improve their English skills. So every Tuesday night over the course of this last year, the district office area has been absolutely packed with families and kids who are there to share a meal. The kids go off and do fun activities led by an adult and our high school students. And then the adults in the families stay in the classroom and brush up on English skills. And this picture is an example of one of our families, and you can see it was a very proud family experience at the conclusion of the program. And this particular family's eldest child just graduated on Sunday, and he's not pictured in this particular photo. But we have about a dozen families who went through this experience. And I think the fact that this was one of the ways that we're trying to reach people personally and improve their sense of belonging, increase their sense of belonging in our district, because they're very, very important members of our community. And that's just one example. The other example that I think it's really important for all of us to think about when we're thinking about the why of why are we spending so much time on equity is the idea that we want to be creating a culture within our school district. We want to be helping nurture the type of people who can look at the world and see things that are not just. They're able to identify it, and they want to be a part of making it different. So this particular picture is just a really great example of a lot of high school kids who all came together to provide all of the childcare for the class that was offered for learning English. So we have all kinds of examples where kids are coming together to learn to be allies. However, including our students in this work is one of the really important next steps that we'll talk about in just a moment.
So we've talked a little bit about the 3 whys. I'm going to take a couple minutes to sort of summarize some of our key learning and what that learning has looked like in the past year. So a year ago, we had formed our district equity team, which included all administrators and then several members from each of our staff. And we went through learning together. This year, our focus was on taking that learning and bringing it to each of the individual buildings. And so the model we frequently use is this iceberg, and we think about learning about our own beliefs, our own assumptions, our own biases that we hold as the first step. Because if you are not aware about what your biases are, you're very likely to not be able to dismantle inequities within your system. So there's a lot of internal work that happened at all of the buildings this year. So each team at each building touched on some of the topics that you see on the far right column. But we wanted to be really responsive and personalized to each staff and what their needs were. And so I worked with the middle school equity team, and we picked the order of the things that we talked about and how we addressed it. We put together folders. The 3 of us put together folders for every building, so there were lots of resources. But the teachers on this team are awesome, and they were finding resources, and so we were all sharing resources, and it really gave a really awesome, I thought, teacher leadership experience for many of our staff members to share their stories and their experiences and their lived experiences with each other, which helped to really, I think, build a community within each of the schools in the area of equity. So that was something that the district equity team kind of helped within each of the buildings. Last summer, Leslie, Candace, and I had an opportunity to hear Zaretta Hammond at Olbert Gardens, and I brought half of the middle school equity team to that as well. And I think this has been the most powerful text that we have found on our journey. And what it does is it helps to bridge the bottom of the iceberg, that internal work, to actionable steps within your classroom, looking at culturally responsive teaching and pedagogy and how it affects your brain. What's going on in your brain while you're learning. And so our teachers love this text because it's helping them not only grow in their inside work, but start to think about, how can I apply this to my practice? What's an idea, a nugget, something that I just read that I can try in my classroom tomorrow? And so each of the buildings had a starting point book study group. Most of the people, I would say it was their equity team. Some of the people who went to the Critical Consciousness Institute also read it. And then we're reading this book as an administrative team also, and we're actually going to finish our reading at workshop in a couple weeks. And so we're learning together, and I know we will continue to put this book in the hands of teachers. I literally have teachers coming to my office. Shannon, do you have any more copies of that book? I heard it's really good. So word is out that this is a really powerful text. And then the last thing Leslie mentioned as part of our pathway work from the teacher comp referendum, equity is one of the pathways. And so we have a lot of teachers who are choosing this pathway, and probably one of the most powerful professional development experiences I've ever engaged in was the Critical Consciousness Institute that was facilitated by Rainey and Percy, who are with the Middleton School District. And we offered this twice. I was in the first cohort, and it's a Friday night and all day Saturday, and it's intense, where you really start to think and learn and ask questions and engage in that work with all these different people from all over the district that you normally don't get to work with. So that was really cool too. We have teachers engaging in book studies. The high school equity team put together a film series where teachers could watch films and then discuss them, and that was really popular, and I know there's a lot of interest in repeating that next year. A whole range of different things. And then we also had some teachers who were going outside of the district and finding things at the university or at Edgewood or things online or through their own professional organizations. So like the music teachers found some equity professional development where they were collaborating with teachers outside of the district on the issue of equity. So what we're starting to see is all these different people are finding different bits and pieces, and they're starting to make the connections and share with each other. So there's a lot of excitement and energy in learning around equity across the district that I think will continue to move us forward on this work.
So then our next steps, this is just for next year, and this is work that will continue for many, many years to come. But for next year, we're working really at Heidi Gill is our facilitator from National Equity Project, and she has really encouraged us to continue to work together as an administrative team and to continue to support each other in their leadership on this work and to make it a part of our regular meetings with one another. So we'll certainly continue to learn and grow together as an administrative team. In addition, part of the work with Soretta Hammond's text is learning to widen your aperture, to take a look at situations that you may have looked at one way before and trying to look at it from different angles so that you're understanding things from multiple perspectives. So we're going to continue to work on that in our foundational PD within the buildings. The next steps also include including our non-certified staff. We have paraprofessional training that we also hope to bring in food service workers also during the month of October. We are working to engage students. As a matter of fact, we have sort of a part 2 to critical consciousness. In August, we are hosting a 3-day institute called Beyond Critical Consciousness, hosted once again or facilitated once again by Percy Brown and Rainey Briggs. And they are, over the summer, working with students who are part of the district to come in and be a part of that experience also, because we want to be able to increase the number of experiences our students have and being able to talk about their experiences within the district. We're also working to engage parents. We have some parents now who are very interested in becoming part of sort of a consultancy group that we work with in order to ensure we're collecting really diverse perspectives from the district. We're talking about how we will measure our progress. And I think one of the ways that a couple of the schools are using this year that I think is just fabulous is the idea of recurring exit tickets. You get to hand in your reflections at the end of a PD session, and then your reflections are used to plan the next section or the next session, but then it is handed back to you. So you can also see your progression of thought over the course of numerous experiences. And so part of that ability to, or part of that process to increase reflection is giving the DELT team at each school information on how to plan PD, but it's also allowing teachers the idea to look at their reflections over time and see how they're personally growing. And then OSA is offering an opportunity for principals to come together, and we hope to be sending some of our team members there. And then finally, I think this is really interesting, the Dane County superintendents are putting together a county-wide equity team. And the first meeting of the superintendents with principals that they are bringing to sort of a beginning conference is on July 31st. With the hope that we can collectively work together as a county, as a group of school districts, to perhaps collaborate on offering professional development or trying to problem solve with one another, because, as many of you know, the Race to Equity report that came out a couple of years ago, it wasn't called the Madison Race to Equity report, it was the Dane County report. So we want to be able to all work together to come up with solutions that fit within each of our contexts also. So we've been very busy. And we're certainly open to questions because we're really excited about the work.
Krista.
Just a couple things. One is, and I know we've had this conversation before, it seems our focus for equity is cultural. And so there are a lot of different areas of equity. Gender is one, both male and female. So I guess my question is, when do we expand our focus for equity initiatives beyond cultural?
Oh, I think that's starting to happen already, because I think once you start to do some of this below the iceberg work, we start to look at biases and assumptions we're bringing to all sorts of interactions with students that come from a variety of backgrounds and families too. So I think that that is something that is unfolding in front of us as part of the process.
And I would say, like at the middle school, our building team has, like our GSA advisor is on our equity team, and so she brings that lens. And so a lot of our examples and the things that we're talking about, some of the videos we've watched, I think it was Cindy Olander even who brought in a video about like redlining and some of those things that happened with poverty. So it's embedded in a lot of the things that we're already doing.
And I think just one of the examples that we already mentioned here was that when we were at the Critical Consciousness Institute, people really were concerned about the pronouns that were there and making sure that that our language that we're promoting is inclusive of everybody. So it's a little bit more of just, it's more than race, it's all areas of equity that the team wants to look at.
And then my second question is about measurables, and I guess I would really like to see more of what your measures are, not only internal and bias related, but what are the end results with students? Because I think when we get the year-end report, there's a culture, and I don't know, we need to do some work in terms of defining what the 4 C's of culture is, but I think it would be helpful to see what exactly are you measuring, what the benchmarks are, so we know from year to year, are we doing better? That's, I think, a board responsibility in terms of where are we now, what are the things that we can look at that say this is working, and it's worth more investment, or we need to invest or do some different things. So we know, I believe that it's working, but I would like to see where are your benchmarks, and then where are we going and what exactly are we measuring?
I would kind of add to that, because that's sort of what I was thinking. It would be nice if in your work you were able to identify obstacles to equity that the board would be more suited to address, whether that's something like looking at internet access for people where they don't have internet access, that kind of thing. So if you can, in your work, identify some of those obstacles that would help us better help you, that would be helpful to us.
I think when we get some of the student voice and the parent voice in there, we're going to have some different measurables than we've even maybe thought of at this point. But I think that's an important next step for us, is to hear from them.
And then my final question too is also kind of piggybacking on what Courtney ended with in terms of policy committee. That would be very helpful if you would give us feedback in terms of those policies we really need to look at, or practices or administrative guidelines that you have that really dovetail from a policy perspective that we really should be looking at.
Thank you. Some of that work will be touched upon at workshop, but it will be a very long process. So I expect we'll be coming to you with things on a pretty regular basis.
Tim, anything?
I know clearly there's lots of effort going on behind the scenes with regards to equity. Do you feel that we are catching up with other districts, other counties, others in the state? Do you feel that we're leading the effort and others are watching us? Where do you think we are in that continuum? Because there's lots going on, clearly.
And either of you, I'll pass this along. For a small suburban district with the population that we have, I would say we are leading. We are definitely leading. However, are we as far along as the school districts who have been working on this for decades? No, but we're certainly studying them and learning from them and trying to avoid some of the pitfalls that they have fallen into.
My second question is, you mentioned engaging parents this coming year, and you mentioned that you have a group of parents who have a particular interest. Where is that particular interest? It usually starts with something. What is it that has caused those parents to come together and speak up?
Great question. We will be expanding our group of parents, but right now, the very small group that we've spoken to, I'll give you one really, really great example, and that is a student or a family who has raised white children in our district and who are now raising children of color within our district. And this family believes that the experiences are very, very different. And they want to be able to share what they're seeing, and they want to work with us to be proactive in addressing it. And the family has reached out already and is wonderful partners with Brooklyn. They've been doing some great things with Brooklyn now. But they don't want it to just be Brooklyn, and we don't want it to just be Brooklyn either. So they have come to us and really wanting to work together, and brought in another family who really wants to work together, and now we want to take that and go out a couple more circles because we want it to be a broad and inclusive group of parents.
I guess the only thing is that looking at data, if in the future we can be seeing some data that shows the difference in growth by group, just because the ACT is kind of a crude measure and it's also so late in their school experience.
We just picked it as a snapshot to give an example, but we could probably show you very similar data using things like STAR, which is the benchmark data that you're used to seeing during the reports.
Dan? Anything?
Thanks. Just a comment that I'm really excited about this program. This sounds great, and I'm glad that teachers and other staff are excited about it as well and getting involved, and congratulations. Good stuff. Regarding the data on the charts that you shared, what does college ready mean?
It's a benchmark defined by ACT, meaning if you are at a certain point in the assessment or you achieve a certain score in the assessment, you are considered at this point ready for college rigor courses.
Okay. You had mentioned in regards to Tim's question that other districts who have been doing this for decades are ahead of us. Does that mean that they're getting better results in academics for the students, or that they're just show that the teachers and staff are more aware, or what does that mean that they're getting better results?
Yes to both. Sometimes we're finding school districts that are getting better results. There are programs that are very promising. AVID is an example of a program that has research-based results that it's yielding great things for kids, and that's one of the reasons that we're putting it in the high school next year. But other districts, yes, they've been working at it longer and they've spent more time beneath the iceberg, and there might be a higher level of awareness. However, I have to say that our staff has been an amazing group of learners on this journey. They have been open-hearted, eager, and we have received, I would say, absolutely no pushback on bringing this forward as a priority for our district. As a matter of fact, most of the time people are saying thank you, or we wish we would have done it before. So our staff has been absolutely excellent, and so I really expect that we'll be able to start identifying things that we want to change for our students to make it better for everyone, because I think we're getting to that point where we might be able to do that with some real thought.
Regarding staff, there's a certain amount of awareness that's necessary to deal with children, and especially when in cultural issues and socioeconomic issues, but also a great impact on children of different backgrounds is seeing examples and people close to them of those same ethnic backgrounds. And is the school district doing anything regarding recruiting and hiring diverse groups of teachers and administrators, and can you talk about that a little bit?
I can, but Mike has been a big part of this too. So, Mike, if I miss something, will you please? Okay. So, Mike and Gina attend a lot of hiring fairs, and they've been working with the Urban League for a couple of years now to partner with them to offer opportunities to members of the Urban League. And they've also begun to consider going to new places to try to recruit more diverse staff. I think one of the obstacles that we're seeing is that everybody is trying to recruit diverse staff. It is a priority for not every district in Dane County, I'm willing to bet, and beyond. So it is a very, very competitive market. But they've made a lot of inroads with our paraprofessional staff. So we're very pleased with that, but we are continuing to work toward hiring a more diverse teaching force also. And Mike, anything that would be important to add? But it's a conscious effort right now.
Has anybody ever broached the topic of perhaps offering bonuses or pay bumps in order to recruit in this area?
No, because we're hoping that the teacher compensation package that was passed in 2016 is making our salaries attractive enough.
Has on that same topic, and last question, has any of our efforts worked as far as this goes, or has it been frustrating?
Other support staff through the efforts of the Urban League and the partnership that Mike and Gina have had. We haven't had a great deal of success with the teaching staff yet. We're hopeful.
I'm also excited about the prospect of getting, once the staff is well acquainted with the program and gets on board, to get the teachers to bring the students in, because there's a lot of things that unfortunately we can't control regarding a student's experience in life beyond the classroom. Sometimes we can't even control that in the classroom as much as we would like. To help students who may be of diverse backgrounds understand the challenges that they are likely to face and ways to counteract those in some ways. Even Facebook, I've recently read that they allow advertisers to choose what types of ethnic groups that they would like to keep from seeing their ads. So there are apartment complexes in New York, for example, that will put their ads on Facebook, and they say, we don't want this ad to appear to anyone with a black or Asian or Latino profile. Now, that's not something that people claim on their profile, but Facebook knows by the way that people interact where you group. And I've seen articles written about, or by people, specifically by a black person, who wanted to try to understand where this hate was coming from that he was feeling on the internet. And so he created a profile that was unlike himself and started posting about how he hated black people and things like this. And it was very surprising and educating to him to find out how people reacted to him differently in the society of the internet. Things like this we can't control in the classroom. By bringing up a cohort of students that move into the society with different attitudes, hopefully things like that will change. But for the students that we're sending out there, I think it's important to let them know that we're aware of these challenges and hopefully to give them some coping mechanisms. in that way. That's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you.
Troy? Courtney? Thanks. The board has, as one of its goals this year is equity and continuing to work on the equity, and I don't think we've set any specific parameters on that. I caught a couple themes as the board walked through this evening in terms of what, from an oversight standpoint, we're looking at, for the next year when we review this particular priority and, in conjunction with our review of Dr. Bustler, and that would be whatever policy recommendations that might come out of this. I think one of the themes has been how have we informed our practice in terms of as educators, as a district, and particularly the pathways. If we can get some report on that, what's changed in terms of what we do. We've got a little bit of that tonight, particularly then what are measurables for success? How are we going to do that? And I think from my standpoint, I'd let you guys take the pass at that rather than the board say, hey, this is kind of how we ought to measure this. But how are we going to view this? Is it going to be whether we're college ready, based on the ACT test, or is there some other measure in terms of whether our equity practices are making a difference here? And that partly might be doing a little more disaggregation of data for us and when we get our report back. We used to do that a lot, but I think that would be helpful with that as a priority, equity as a priority. I think we need a little more disaggregation of data so that we can see that on a yearly basis. So board members, does that sound like a plan in terms of how we want to proceed from our equity priority, which is one of our 4 or 5? Krista?
I know we touched on this at our session at the union, but there is currently active in the Village of Oregon a workforce development housing task force, which Karen Victorson is actually kind of project managing that. Steve and I are a part of those conversations, and I think that if you've done a lot of the research too, housing is a big piece of that. So I think from a board role, Steve, our participation in that, and I know Mike Grace is meeting with Brian about some of the topics associated with that too. So I think that's a piece that the board can continue to be part of that conversation, because housing is a big piece of that. And then just as a side note, Friends of Oregon School District has been a partner in this initiative too, and we're actually meeting with Leslie and Jim tomorrow about helping fund Avid. So.
Yeah, I know we've had that conversation. I had written down that equity also means access, and one of them was internet, as you said, and that's a big role, particularly socioeconomically, and particularly when we're talking individualized learning, and so much of that involves technology. So that might be an area we look at.
Sorry, one more thing. The other thing is the Youth Sports and Athletic Task Force has an equity piece associated with that report that's coming. And then in terms of transportation, I think with our transportation plan, and I know we had piloted the activity bus, so it would be nice to know at some point in time kind of what the results are of that first year of that pilot program and where that's heading.
And yeah, and part of that access means I would think that part of equity also means that we become more diverse, because as we become more diverse, we realize barriers to equity and differing views of equity and what that means. And I just reflect on the experiences of my middle daughter and her husband, who both are public school teachers. They both work in Middleton, so they've got access to funds, and they can't find a house in Oregon within their income range. I mean, in the Oregon School District, there's none. So notch that down. I mean, they're doing well economically, but notch that down. That's a barrier in terms of creating a diverse community where equity becomes a little easier to talk about than if we were homogenous, So I'm not sure, Courtney and I have had that debate, is how much do we get into as a board, whether that's our role in terms of those access, we sure can be part of the conversation outside of, former board roles, and I intend to be, and I know Krista has been, to make this a more diverse community. So I think what I'll do is work with Brian to take these ideas. I've tried to capture them, and Brian and I talk about some of the measurables in terms of our priorities and what we're looking for. I think it's generally right now oversight and things that we want to see develop, much like we did with individualized learning, and monitor that progress. That makes sense, guys? Okay. You guys have any questions for us? Is there anything we can do to assist you as we go through as a board, knowing that we have this as one of our initiatives this year?
Well, I think that once we start bringing things forward to policy, I think that's probably the biggest role the board will be able to play.
Okay, good. All right, that takes us into our next agenda item then, which is F, Graduation 2018 Report. And Brian, the floor is yours. And then why don't you just roll in when you're done with this, the SOUP report.
The graduation report will be short. What I distributed is yesterday's commencement program, and we had a near full house yesterday. I'm sure we could have fit a few more people in, but sitting on the stage and looking to our left and right and in front of us, there was clearly a large group and what appeared to be almost a full house. I will say it is really nice to take some of that concern with weather out of play for families as well as for everyone that helps organize the commencement day, because that's just always been a concern. Family members are traveling to see their young relatives. On commencement day, we had 282 graduates. For those of you that were there, the student speeches were just outstanding. Jim and Jen Yancey added a musical selection this year, and that was also terrific. So if you ever have feedback for us, let Jim or me know. Otherwise, we're planning graduation for the second Sunday in June of 2019. I will just keep moving to the superintendent report. On May 22nd, I shared this before, but I just want to underscore it again. On May 22nd, we hosted an AVID signing commitment ceremony. We had 30 students in the high school commons, and these are freshman students that we have recruited to be in the AVID program for their 4-year cycle in high school. And Jim and I, as well as a few others, spoke to the students and their parents, and we are excited and proud of their commitment to the AVID program. Again, we're relatively new to AVID. Other school districts, I'll say 4 of the districts that are ahead of us, largely by size and also ahead of us in terms of equity, and this won't come as a surprise: the Madison School District, Verona, Middleton, and Sun Prairie. After those 4, I would say we are really next in line in terms of our commitment, because, Leslie, this starts our 4th year in equity, and this past year, as Leslie and the team mentioned, the Dane County superintendents became involved, because there's some districts in Dane County, obviously smaller districts with a really different demographic, that have done no work in equity, and we talked about doing it on a district-wide basis so that we could learn from one another. One of the great things I learned from my colleagues in Verona was they saw an incredible benefit to getting student voice into the equity process, and that's really one of our next year items. So we will continue to work on that. Another item that I will send around, and a couple of board members were able to make it to this event, and that's on May 30th. This is the retirement booklet from the class of 2018, and annually we hold a retirement celebration, and that was on Wednesday, May 30th, right in this room. In my weekly update this past week, I shared with you an end-of-the-year reading activity that I had with one of Jen Landis's students. Jen is a kindergarten teacher at Netherwood, and this young guy that read to me he's a pretty incredible reader, and he was very excited about the end of the school year. He had his baseball cap on. He told me he loves to play baseball, so he's looking forward to school being over. He also loves school. He's very dedicated to his work. Two last items. We have almost too many end-of-the-year celebrations to even mention, whether it's a 4K at kindergarten, a fourth grade, an RCI moving on session or program, or the moving on at the middle school. Again, those end-of-the-year celebrations are really important, symbolic, and real events for young kids and their families. And then lastly, Steve already mentioned it, we have the 5 Levers workshop with Dr. Rickabaugh on Wednesday night, and the middle school is going first because a middle school principal asked me to go first. She's the one that reached out, and then RCI, and then Prairie View. So I hope that's in your calendar, and if you can't make the entire time, please stop by, because remember, we're giving the school leadership teams feedback that they'll be working on over the summer. So unless you have questions, that concludes my report for tonight.
Okay, agenda. We've got for July 9th. That's at your desk. Janie put that up. In terms of action items, we have food service pricing, and then being work on the work we've done on the growth task force. We're going to have some reimbursement resolutions related to that, and then hopefully we'll be in a point where we can do the final vote in terms of the language and the costing of that for referendum. We'll keep monitoring that as we go, and then I don't think we're going to have any committee reports at that time. So one of the things that we may have, Brian, is commissioning, the formal commission by the board of a task force to look at the way we elect board members. Just
the
to
reapportionment.
the reapportionment, just to update that. It's been 20 years since we've looked at that. I've gotten commitment from 2 of the 3 former board presidents that we've talked about. I just haven't connected up with the third one, so that's going to be a go. I think we'll bring some language in on that, and then working on the 4 Cs and that. But Brian and I've got to do some work on that. Any other items on the agenda for the 9th that anyone wants on? Okay, if you have anything, let us know. That takes us to checkout. Troy, anything?
Congratulations to the girls soccer team for advancing to the state tournament this coming weekend. That's all I had.
Just yay, school's out.
Barb? Tim? Krista? A couple things. Jim Pliner, where are you? Big shout out. Terrific job yesterday. I mean, it was just, school was fantastic. I saw the big pile of mulch out there earlier in the week. The school looked terrific. The event was well organized. Speakers were terrific. It was just great, so thank you. I know that takes a lot of work. It seems like it's seamless, but a lot of planning has to go into pulling something like that out, and it was great to see that, Jim, that way. With that, as you guys know, I'm working with Brian on our to-do list for the remainder of the year. With that, I've got a lot of input from you guys. If you have any more, let me know. Brian and I will finalize that so that we can kind of use that as a guidepost. It's not an exclusive list, but just things that we want to keep working toward, and that will serve as Brian and my guide for developing our future agendas as we go through during the year and tasks that we want to accomplish. So, and the last thing that I have is, it was great at graduation to have the high school choir sing there. I mean, that was a great addition to that. I don't know if any of you had the opportunity to see the Tony Awards last night, where The Stoneman Douglas High School theater group got up. Oh my God, that was spectacular. Where they sang "Seasons of Love." I mean, if you didn't have tears after that, you're not. Yeah, you're not human. So I mean, I think I sent this out to some text to a couple of you. Is like every week we seem to have a STEM article on the front page of the Observer, which is really great because we're doing great things in that, but we're also a really strong supporter of the arts, and that kind of, I think yesterday showed, kind of the heart of a district, and last night on the Tonys that music brings that part of a soul to our educational experience. So I'm proud that we have a district that values the arts to the degree that we do. I missed you, right, Courtney, as I went through. Your turn.
It's my turn. I think some of us know, maybe not everybody, but tonight's meeting marks an important milestone. And I'm going to try really hard not to cry. It's our very last Board of Education meeting under the steady hand and boundless energy of Janie Wick. For 19 years, Janie has given tirelessly to the Oregon School District in her role as executive assistant to our superintendents. She has been a right-hand woman, not a right-hand man, a right-hand woman, to Brian, to Linda before Brian. And did you serve a superintendent before Linda? Just Linda. You have kept on top of millions of details. You have helped them navigate a complicated landscape of meetings, appointments, phone calls, parents, and you have always been one step ahead of them. That's been amazing, and I know that they've appreciated your service. You've been an invaluable font of institutional knowledge for everyone in the district. I'm quite sure that no one knows more about Oregon history and the Oregon School District than Janie Wick, including what lies buried in the dungeon of Netherwood Knoll Elementary School. And you may take those secrets with you when you go, I don't know. But most importantly to me and to every board member who has served under you, you've been a resource, a cheerleader, a patient and understanding provider of background material and board packets, doodle polls, and everything else that we have requested of you. You've made sure we're always prepared, and I know I've never heard you say no when you've been asked to do something more. You have set us up for success over and over again. You have been through our side, through thick and thin, at early morning meetings, at late night meetings. You've had snacks for us when we needed them. You've been through some tough times with us, through expulsion hearings. And through it all, Janie, you have been a rock, and you have always, as Dr. Busser would say, kept that compass facing north to our kids, more than anyone in this district. I cannot imagine how anyone is going to fill your shoes, and I can't even begin to understand how we are going to get by at our next board meeting. You've been a friend to all of us, and for that, I know I'm eternally grateful. It's been said that success has nothing to do with what you gain or what you accomplish for yourself. It's what you do for others. And by that definition, I know, Janie, you leave us as the most successful person to come through the Oregon School District. You are beloved. You will be dearly, dearly missed. And on behalf of the board and all the administrators here tonight, we wish you a long, happy, healthy retirement.
We'll take 5 minutes. Okay, and we'll go into closed session. We will not return to open.
Yes, you will.
Trying to think of what it's going to be like. I know. Pictures. I know. So you just only a phone call away. Tell them right. Change your number.
We're going to probably need to move up the date on when we have that operational stuff. Because I think we might need to meet with the board.
Oh, my gosh.
I think we might need to meet with them on the 20th. I'm gone the week of I'm gone the 4th of July.
That's why you didn't know.
So if we could get, why don't you check with,
I hope you're going to have fun in your
Operational or debt
We'll think about it.
I'd say both.
Right? I haven't started operational. I mean, I kind of started something.
Good, starting.
You know, if we could, if we could have,
29th is my last day. My husband already plans for
if we could have, you know, her here on the 28th. I'm just,
I'll send her an email now.
you know, it's the day after. You know, or maybe we'd have to do it on the 21st. You know, that night.
Yeah. Good.
Or or Friday the 22nd. You know, if we did something in the morning. I'm just throwing out dates where, you know, if we did something at 7 a.m. But that really puts you under the gun.
What day were you talking? Sorry.
Either the 21st, 22nd, or 28th.
Yeah.
I mean, she probably had the capital thing, right?
Yeah, that's easy.
Yeah. It's just
Although I
the.
was thinking of increasing it a little bit just because of the new building. So,
Yeah. Well, I mean the borrowing amount.
right.
The long-term debt amount.
Right.
But
She's the one that projects that.
Yeah. But she'd have to. She'll project if we have